we're going to start with some questions that we got from YouTube.
Sure.
We have one that came in from Kay Puta, and Kay writes, how were you able to juggle a production company through high school and university and still be a comedy legend all those years?
Wow, that's all news to me.
Oh, okay, all right.
Comedy
Kay.
legend. I mean, when I was a kid, I started my first production company when I was maybe 9 or 10, Boy of Destiny Productions.
Oh, nice.
No, like, it was making movies, making little videos with my friends was my hobby. Like, it's what I did. Like, when other kids were playing soccer or kissing girls, like, I was making little movies with my friends. And as I got older, as I got in high school, I found fellow friends who wanted to make movies, and we formed a production company, even just to we made a feature in high school. You know, we made 3 features by the time I went to college over the summers. And from a young age, I knew that I wanted to make movies and work in creative entertainment fields, and like, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. And so, like, starting my own company that started as a goof, and then actually Johnny Voodoo Productions, which I started like as a goof in high school, and now is like my actual LLC production company that I used to make stuff. I just maintained it ever since, and yeah, I guess I've just always kept that going, because it's like I have jobs to make money, but then also for fun, or as a creative artistic outlet. Like, there's the stuff I do over here, and luckily we live in an industry, we work in an industry where sometimes we can even make those things overlap. I don't know if that answered your question at all, but
I think it does. Well, it's Kay's question, but
Yeah.
I think that does.
Yeah.
I know you talked about you grew up in, I'm sorry, I should say it Nolans, but
no, it's New Orleans.
New
We don't
Orleans,
like
okay.
Nolans. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
When you spell it Nawlins.
It's trying to be cool. Okay,
no.
see, it backfired.
Yeah.
But so you were from New Orleans.
Born and raised in New Orleans, on the bayou. Not really the bayou, but yeah, I grew up right on the other side of the Mississippi River, like from the French Quarter. And yeah, like, growing up in New Orleans was I didn't realize how unique it was, like, while I was growing up, because I just thought every city was like this. It's like, oh, every city's got, like, it's super old and you have Mardi Gras, right? I didn't realize, I don't know, I just didn't understand its uniqueness until later on when I left. And I was like, oh, that's a pretty cool place. And the whole city has a vibe of, like, creative energy and really supporting, you know, creativity. And I loved it.
And there's like a supernatural sort of mediumship.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of voodoo.
undercurrent.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of ghosts.
Okay.
Everything's haunted. Anywhere you go, there's some spirit doing something.
Nice. Hopefully behaving.
Usually pretty good.
Oh,
yeah,
good.
yeah,
Good.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's the cool thing about New Orleans is, like, anywhere you go, it'd be like, hey, see that house over there? It's like 180 years old, and a bunch of people died in that house. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. But now it's a dentist's office.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now he does root canals.
Yeah.
So. Okay, so then we have one here from Nate's Film Tutorials. Hi, Nate. How did you go about starting your own production company, and what advice would you give to those who are starting out? So we kind of talked about that.
Yeah, I mean, all you got to do to start a production company is register it with the city, and then you have a company. But then it's just like, then you actually have to go do stuff, you know? Then you have to make stuff. And, you know, like, I live in Los Angeles. No matter where you live, you find the creative people in your city, and you just kind of, like, get to know them and hang out with them and become friends with them. And it's amazing, you know, even going to a barbecue, like, it's a friend's birthday barbecue, and you go and you start talking to people. You're like, so what do you do? And you're like, oh, I'm a composer. Oh, cool. Like, I actually have been looking for a composer. And then you get their card, or you get their information. The next time you need a composer, you met that person at a barbecue. And, you know, they often say, like, in the movie business, it's who you know, right? But that doesn't just mean, like, your family connections or something. It's just, like, who you know, like, socially in life, you know, because you went to a barbecue and you met a composer. And then part of, like, having a production company or making stuff is just knowing people in all fields. It's not just, you know, like, as a writer, I sit at home in working on my laptop by myself. But like, if you want to actually produce stuff and have a production company, you need to know people in all the fields. You need to know sound people. You need to know composers. You need to know craft services people. Like, you have to just get out and like be introduced to people in all fields, so that when it comes times to make something, if you have a production company that makes stuff, you need to be able to call anyone in any position. And if someone's like, hey, do you have a transpo guy, like someone who drives trucks? You're like, yeah, I know three people I could call right now, and that's really helpful.
Do you have to force yourself to get out sometimes?
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I like to be an isolationist often. But also, like, just trying to get on set in any capacity. Even, when I was younger, I was just a PA on set, and you just meet everybody, right? You meet the craft services person, you meet the transpo guys, you meet the hair and makeup people, and you become friendly with them, and you get to know them. And then, so much of production is just referrals of, the DP is working on a new project, and that project needs a craft services, and he's like, oh, well, I know a person that I met on my last thing. Here, why don't you call them? And so, I love being on set. Like, I love directing and being on set, and like, it's so much fun. That to me, that's almost like networking, right? Is just being on a set and like meeting everybody. Because some directors will go on a set and just not talk to anybody but their AD or like the actors. But I'm someone who, like, on the first day, I try to introduce myself to everybody. And like, I want to know who the transpo guys are. Like, I want to know every art department person, like, what is their name, and get to know them all and become Facebook friends with them. And because maybe we'll work together again. Maybe I'll need you or you'll need me. Who knows?
How did you get a screenwriting agent right after college, was it?
I went to the University of Texas, and they used to do this thing called the Hollywood Showcase, where they would take an hour's worth of student films and they would show it out here in LA at the DGA Theater, and they would invite alumni of the university just to come and see the short film, just to see, like, what are the kids doing back at school. And so the year I graduated, I had written a short film that played, and I had written and directed another one. So I had two, including a puppet short that ended up becoming the inspiration for the Happy Time Murders. But so I was, living in Austin. I was delivering pizza. I was going to move to Chicago and do Second City, and then go to New York because, I grew up thinking like LA, like Hollywood, like sell out. What am I going to sell out? And so they picked two of my short films to play at this thing, and I graduated like on Saturday, and a couple days later, like, I came to LA just to go to the screening, just because I'd never been to LA before, and I just graduated. I was like, I'll go to the Hollywood Walk of Fame. I'll go to the beach. And so I go to the screening, and there was an agent at the screening who just happened to go to my college, and he was just there to see the shorts, and he liked my short films so much that he walked up to me at the reception afterwards and said, hey, I loved your short film. Have you written any features before? Because I'm a literary agent. I represent writers. And I said, well, I wrote one for class. Like, I took a screenwriting class. And he's like, oh, well, send it to me. I'd love to read it. And I was like, sure. So I got his card, and I went back to Austin, and I mailed it to him. This was back in the day where you mailed people things.
Wow.
And I just kept delivering pizza, saving up money to move to Chicago. And then a couple months later, he called me, and he just said, hey, we read your script, and we love it. We want to sign you and represent you as a writer. But you have to move to Los Angeles. You can't move to Chicago because we want to be able to send you to meetings. And I was like, okay. So I was like out delivering pizza, and I went back, and I was like, I'm out. I'm moving to Hollywood. Wow. And just from these short films that I had done that got someone's attention, and, and I know the story is ridiculous, and that I was 22 years old and I was plucked from obscurity. But also part of the story is, I had these short films that somebody saw, and when he came to me and said, what else do you have? I was able to say, well, I have this script that I wrote, and I gave it to him. And he read that and he liked it. And so, I have a lot of friends who make short films, or, who, as a calling card, which is an amazing calling card, is a short film to get people's attention. And I always tell them, like, you have to be prepared for if someone sees your short film and likes it, and then they say, what else do you have? What do you have any features? Like, do you have something? You have to be able to say yes. Like, here is the other thing, because I have a lot of friends who have this short that they've worked really hard on, and they'll go play a festival or something, and then they'll meet an agent or a producer, and the agent will say, "What else do you have?" And they're like, "Well, no, I've got some ideas like of stuff I want to try to start working on, but nothing right now. Like, you can't do that. You have to have something ready to go." That's my piece of advice.
And going back to when you were delivering pizzas that day, did you actually get the call while you were on a run? Like,
So this is actually a really funny story. So I graduated and I was living in Austin, and I was moving out of my apartment because I was going to spend 6 months living with a friend of mine in her spare bedroom, saving up money over the summer and into just like, I graduated in May when you graduate, and then I was going to move in January. So I had like 7 months where I was just going to deliver pizza and make money. And so I had to move out of my apartment. So I moved everything out of my apartment except my answering machine. The only thing that was still in my apartment, because this was before, I don't even think I had a cell phone yet. This was 2001. So I had an answering machine. And when I gave that agent a business card, by the way, still my agent to this day. Here we are, 16 years later. When I gave him my card in Los Angeles, the only number that was on it was my apartment in Austin, because I didn't have a cell phone. So the only way he had of contacting me was to call my apartment. So I hadn't heard from him for like 2 or 3 months or whatever. And I was like, oh, I guess he never got my script or didn't read my script. So the only thing left in my apartment was my answering machine. So I went and I moved everything over to the new place, and then I had to go back, clean, and then take the answering machine away. So I go back to clean, and there's a red light blinking on the answering machine. And I was like, oh, I have a message. And I'm beep. And it's like, hey, Todd, it's Stephen from the Counter Agency. We read your script. Give me a call. Had I gotten to my apartment like an hour earlier and unplugged the machine, I just never would have gotten a call from him. Who knows if he would have tried to track me down by some other means. Wow. But that message was waiting for me. And the only thing left in my apartment was that answering machine. So I'm knocking on wood because I was really lucky. But I then got a cell phone, and I stayed in Austin for like 3 months delivering pizza because I still needed to save up money to move to LA. Because just because then I had an agent didn't mean I was like rich or something. I still needed to afford to move to LA. So I was delivering pizza, saving up money. I bought a cell phone and I gave it to my agent my new cell phone number. And he took my script that I wrote for class, and he gave me some notes on it, and I did a new draft. And then he sent it around town as a spec script. And he showed it to a bunch of producers, and like I didn't know what that meant. And so I'm out on a delivery in Austin, and my phone rings, and it's my Hollywood agent. And he's like, Todd, hey, we went out with your script, and we just set it up at Paramount it was Kelsey Grammer's company at the time, Gramnet. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? And he's like, well, it's $10,000 option, plus you're going to get Writers Guild minimum of $27,000 to do the guaranteed rewrite. And I was just like, I'm sorry, what? And he's like, yeah, so it's a guaranteed $37,000. And I was just like, I was like, that's more money than I've ever even heard of imagining. Because I'm making like $7 an hour at this pizza place. So it was like a dream. I was like, I couldn't believe it. And I went back to the Double Dave's Pizza where I worked, and I walked in, and I was like, I'm out! I quit! I'm Hollywood now! But then I'm a nice guy, so I actually finished my shift.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's admirable.
I think I even worked one more shift, but then I quit, and then I moved to LA. But that being said, I did then learn the harsh realities of, like, it's not like everything I wrote got sold or I got jobs that easy. Like, I thought that's how it worked because my first script out the gate, like, I got optioned and got a rewrite. So I was just like, oh, every script I ever write now is gonna get optioned and set up. But no, it took a while for it to happen again the second time. I hit lightning in a bottle that first time. And I moved out to LA thinking, like, I'm a wonderkin. I'm an awesome, young, hotshot 22-year-old. And then the harsh realities of being a working writer actually set in. And it got hard.
How soon after that?
Oh, pretty soon.
Pretty soon, okay.
Pretty soon. Like, I wrote another script. I moved out, I wrote another script. And I'm like, cool, let's show this one. I'm sure I'm going to set this one up. And no one cared. Oh. People were like, no, what else? And I was like, oh. And then years went by before I actually set up another one of my own scripts. Because, I learned very quickly that when you want to be a working writer, it's not like you write scripts and then go sell them to people. Most jobs you're ever going to work are you writing scripts for other people based on their ideas or pre-existing material. So it's not like people are looking for original scripts as much as it is, hey, we need a writer to rewrite that draft of the Ninja Turtles movie, or, we bought the IP for some 80s cartoon and we need a writer to write a script for it. And so I very quickly realized, like, oh, I actually have to work really hard now to go to meetings and meet producers and try to get an assignment, is what it's called, in order to get paid to, like, write stuff. And for years, that's all I did. I mean, to this day, that's my primary source of income, is I just do assignment work, which is a hard job. Like, you spend half your time trying to get the next assignment, and then the little free time you do have, you try to work on an original script that you hopefully can sell to someone someday.
I heard you say, or maybe it was your executive producer in an interview say, we will believe it when we have a call sheet.
Yes.
Happy Time Murder. So
yes.
It's been, what, 16?
16 years. I mean, so my friend Dee Robertson and I, that puppet short film I made in college that I wrote and he directed. And then we both moved out to LA in 2002. I think he had moved out a little earlier than me. But that's when we hatched the idea of, like, let's do a feature, like a puppet human buddy cop movie, and do it as a feature. And we came up with the characters together and the story, and then I wrote the script. And the original plan was, like, he was going to direct it. We're going to go out and make it ourselves. We're going to raise a little bit of money and go shoot it. And then we realized, it's very expensive, like, to make a puppet movie. You have to build every set because you need puppeteers under the floorboards. So our thought of doing it as, like, a cheap little indie, like, quickly went away. And we tried to set it up at a couple places over the years, but didn't really pan out. And so we put it on the shelf. And for years, people would get interested in it. And Dee and I would always say, Dee, who's still heavily involved with the movie, is an executive producer on the movie. We'd always be like, we'll believe it when we see a call sheet. Like, they would attach an actor and everyone would get excited. And we'd be like, yeah, we'll believe when we see a call sheet. Or they'd get a bunch of money. Like, they'd set it up at a financing company or a production company. And we'd be like, yeah, we'll believe it when we see a call sheet. Just because we set it up at the Henson Company in 2007. Oh, wow. And 9 years went by with a lot of times where it would look good, but then not happen. And our joke, Dee and I's joke with each other, was always, we'll believe when we see a call sheet. And then one day, I get a call that Melissa McCarthy's doing the movie and they're going to shoot it. And I was like, yeah, I'll believe it when I see a call sheet. Like, still. And then one day I got a call sheet. Like, then one day I got an email with a PDF in it of Happy Time Murders shooting day one. And I was like, oh, it's real. Like, it's really real. It's not going to fall apart. Like, it's really happening. And I went to set and I got to see these puppet characters that Dee and I had came up with, probably drunk at a bar in 2002, and these locations, like, that we had, imagined years ago. We're like, oh, they built the set and they built all these puppets, and here they are, and they're actually shooting this movie. It's real, and we're on set, and here we are. But still, I was still skeptical. I was still like, no, something bad's gonna happen, right? Like, a meteor is gonna hit the soundstage. Still, something bad's gonna happen. Like, and still part of me sitting here with you right now, the movie's gonna come out in a couple weeks. I still think something horrible is gonna happen. Like, part of me, my pessimist personality is like, something still horrible is gonna happen, right? But I've seen billboards and bus ads. I've seen commercials. This movie's really happening. It's really coming out. Unless this is all some elaborate prank that you guys have all been pulling on me, which I would not be surprised.
It could be a Philip K. Dick reality distortion. We don't know. Is it real? Am I really a puppet? We don't know.
I would not going to be surprised if I wake up tomorrow and I walk out into my living room and I see my wife and I'm like, oh yeah, the Happy Time Murders interview I did yesterday went really well. And my wife's like, what's the Happy Time Murders? And I'm like, wait, what? And then I go to my computer and it never has existed and it was all been a dream.
Well, if you're like most people, myself included, I get nervous when things are kind of going, because if you've had the bottom fall out of certain things.
Oh, something's going too smoothly?
Right. You're no, this is a bad sign right here.
I don't trust if anything goes too smoothly. Like, I'm always, not just with like making movies, but with anything. Like, if I get a new router from my Wi-Fi and I plug it in and it works right away, I'm like, what's wrong?
Right.
Like, there's no way. Like, there's no way that was this easy. Nothing's ever this easy.
It's going straight to the White House.
Exactly. Yes. It's going to Russia.
Didn't you write the script in like an interesting scenario? You went to a motel or something?
Well, yeah. So when D and I first came up with the characters, like we slowly came up with the characters and kind of the loose outline of the plot. And then when I wrote the script, when I was like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the script and then like, D, you're going to be kind of like my bounce board. You're going to be in the room with me and I'm going to be able to like run stuff by you. So what we did was we're going to get a hotel room and I'm going to sit at the laptop and you're going to just like be in the room, like pacing or doing whatever it is you're doing and helping me. And so we went online and we just found the cheapest hotel room we could possibly find, which is by LAX. And it was like a Quality Inn and it was like $39. And remember the only food, we had this grand vision of being bohemian artists, so we're going to go right in a hotel. And then you show up and it's just the saddest LAX hotel. And the only food anywhere near there was an AM/PM where we could go get coffee. And there was a Subway, like a 24-hour Subway that we would go eat at. But we holed up in this hotel for, I think it was one night. And then we sat in the lobby. Like we had to check out at a certain time. So then we sat in the lobby of the hotel across the street. And we just I banged out a first draft. I mean, it wasn't good, but I mean, it was serious. It was like 75 pages in 24 hours or something like that. Just writing. And it was pretty awesome. Dee and I, we should go back to that hotel. Just like the night of the premiere.
Yeah.
We should do an after party in that sad little LAX hotel room.
Were there moments there that you're like, what are we doing? This is like we're almost living out a writer's sort of fantasy out of an 80s movie?
Yeah, I mean, as a writer, you always have this vision of like what writers are supposed to do. And I've even done it since. Like my jam now is I love to get a hotel. If I'm on a deadline, I'll get a hotel room for a day or for a night and I'll just stay up all night writing. Or I wrote a novel a few years ago, and when I did the second draft of it, I got a room in Palm Springs for like a week.
Oh, nice.
And I just went out there for a week. And a couple times I've been on deadline for a script, like on an assignment. And I'm like, oh, I was supposed to write the script over the last 8 weeks and I haven't started it yet. So I'm just going to go get a hotel room for a week. But I did have a grand vision of like, oh, you're supposed to drink while writing, right? Like, isn't that what Ernest Hemingway did? So I'd buy like a big bottle of whiskey and I'd put it on the table. And I'm like, okay, here we go. I'm going to start writing. And then I would have a drink. And one drink in, I'm like, I don't want to write anymore. I want to just sit on that big, comfortable bed and watch a movie. So I can't do that. I think some people can, like, drink whiskey while they write because that's what writers are supposed to do.
Right.
But I can't. I just lose it. Like, I have one sip of whiskey, and I'm like, I want to do anything other than this right now.
Well, what about a nice hotel versus a seedy motel? Because one, you kind of think like your brain gets tricked that life is good and safe, and the other one, you realize like there's a desperation to some of it.
Well, the difference between a seedy motel or a nice motel, the only thing that's important is that you go someplace incredibly boring, so that there's nothing tempting you to do anything else. And one time I wanted to work on a script, so I went to like the Glendale Hilton in beautiful Glendale, California.
Yeah.
Just because I knew there was nothing around there to walk to that would tempt me to like go to someplace, because everything around there was like offices that closed down. And so I was like, oh, great. And even when I've gone to Palm Springs, I remember one time I like doing the Travelocity secret deal, like where you don't know where you're staying. You just know the price of it, because you can often stay someplace cool for like half the price because you're basically promising to stay there no matter what. So I remember once I had to go for like a week to write a script, and it was the fall. It was like October. And so I go on Travelocity secret deal, and they're like, you can stay at a 5-star resort in Palm Springs for like $70 a night or something. Wow. And I was like, okay. So I did it. But you know, with the secret deal, you have to agree to pay no matter what. They can tell you you're staying at the Fleabag Motel and you have to stay there. I mean, it has to at least be the star rating that you signed up for. But anyway, so because you pay ahead of time, you have to pay before you even know where you're staying. So anyway, so I did it, and they put me at the Riviera in Palm Springs, which is like a cool old retro, like 1960s resort hotel. Mm-hmm. So I show up, and it's October, and I walk in, and I was like, hey, they're like, oh, welcome, Mr. Berger. You're here for 5 days, I see. And I'm like, yeah, what's important? I'm here to write. Like, I have my laptop, and I'm here to write for 5 days. So I need to make sure my room has a desk in it, because I don't want to be stuck in a room that doesn't have a desk if I'm here to write. And they're like, oh, well, actually, our only rooms with desks are like back in Tower 4, which doesn't have a view of the pool. It's actually not by the pool. I'm like, that's fine. I have no desire to go to the pool. I'm not getting in the pool. They're like, well, it's also not near the fitness center or the bar. And I'm like, that's fine. I don't want to be near any of the cool stuff. I just want a nice quiet room that has a desk in it. And they're like, okay, cool. Well, just so you know, you're going to be the only person in Tower 4. And I was like, perfect. So it's basically like The Shining for a week, because I was literally the only person in an entire wing of this resort. And it was October in Palm Springs, which is like the windy season. So you'd be sitting there like working, and you just hear like howling wind outside and like trees smashing up against the window. And you would go walk around these big, spooky, totally empty hallways. And it was pretty awesome. I've tried to replicate it, but it's never worked out. But it was a magical time. But I highly recommend that. Going to Palm Springs in the off season, because it's super cheap. Because nobody's there. Like when everyone goes for the summer, like to go in pools, but go to Palm Springs in like October, November, and nobody's there. It's great. Hole up someplace. It's magic.
What part of the screenwriting process would you say you're the best at, and maybe then not so great? Like, are you great at the first draft, but not so great at rewrites, or maybe it's the opposite?
I would say I'm really good, first draft, let's say. I'm really good at plotting. Like I figured out the mathematical formula to like a plot of a movie, and being able to figure out exactly when everything should happen. Because really, when you think about it, writing a movie, especially Hollywood movies, like I know there are movies that break the formula, but it is all math. It's all a mathematical formula. And you need certain things to happen on certain pages. And the inciting incident needs to come around here, and you need emotional character journeys to kind of happen on here, and you need this and that and the other thing. So I feel like I'm really good at figuring out a plot and then figuring out how it all goes down. My weak spot, definitely on the first draft, is like, why are any of these characters doing this? Or like, why do we care about them? Like, what are the emotional journeys like of the characters sometimes? I think of almost being secondary. Like, I'm such a plot person that I love to figure out like what actually happens in this movie from A, B to C. Like, how does it start? What is the middle? What is the end? But then I have writer friends who are totally character people, who they think of the character first and the entire backstory of that character and what happens with that character's emotional journey, and then they figure out the plot of the movie. Like, I'm the opposite. I think of the plot of the movie, and then I figure out who are these characters really? Like, what do they want? What are their emotional journeys? And that's what I figure out, like, in the rewrites. Like, that's what I go back in. But I'm super OCD, and, like, I won't finish a script. If I start a script, I have to finish it. Like, I won't do anything else. And, I'll write an outline, number 1 to 100. I'll just number page 1 to 100. And I'm like, what happens on every minute of the movie. This is every page. What happens on every minute of this movie? On page 1, this is what happens. Page 15, this is what happens. Page 82, this is what happens. Page 100, this is the last scene. And I'll fill in all those gaps. And I'll put it on my desk. I'll print it up, actually print it. I'll put it on my desk. And then I'll start writing. And I'll be like, I'm not going to be happy until I've gotten through all 100 pages. And I'll ignore all other aspects of my life. I won't go out, I won't do anything, I won't go see movies. I'll just work on it. I'll wake up at 6:30 in the morning and I'll work on it until my brain's fried and I can't work on it anymore. And I'll just do that until I have a first draft. And the first draft often sucks, but at least it's done. And then you can set it aside, take some time off of it, and then come back to it. And the rewrite is the fun part for me.
Do you always know what's going to happen on line 100? I mean, is the end of it always sort of clear to you?
Yeah, the first thing I do is I write down page 1, what happens on page 1, what happens on page 30. That's the end of the first act. That's your inciting incident. Like, that is your movie, right? It's what happens on page 30 is, if you were to go see a trailer for the movie, page 30 is the thing that's in the trailer, right? And then I write down what happens on page 100. Like, how does it end? Like, what is the ending? I need to know where this is going, and then I figure out how do we get there. So, and then you fill in all the holes. You know, on page 80-ish is like the end of the second act, like dark of night. Like, what's gone really bad for everybody? Like, why is this the end of the second act? And then you fill in all those holes in between. But I like to come up with really cool endings, really cool third acts, like, and then move backwards in a way. Like, I want to know where this is all going and how it ends. I feel like a lot of people, a lot of writers spend a lot of time on their first act, and then, and when you see a lot of movies, the first act's really awesome, and then they just kind of don't know what to do with it. Like, they have a really good idea that they don't know what to do with. What I strive really hard to think about the second half of the movie. And then, to a fault, like, often people's criticisms of my work is like, yeah, your first act is really meandering or like really long, but your second half is great. So I try to focus on the second half of the movie. But, you know, the hard part being a writer is most people don't even get to the second half of the movie when they're reading your script. They read the first 10 pages, and your first 10 pages better blow them away. Whereas I often believe in, like, the slow burn of a first act, of like, take it really slow and let stuff develop. Which is to my detriment often. But I'm getting better. at it.
Let's suppose you finish because you had this thing where you want to finish something, and I think that's great. Mm-hmm. But let's suppose you finish it, and then eventually you go back to it, and you're like, I'm not really into it. Do you just leave it alone? But the fact that you finished it was what was mainly important to you?
I'll always want to get it to a point where I can show it to other people. Like, I've never written anything. I've never done a first draft of anything and been like, like, I'm glad I wrote this, but I'm never going to show it to anyone, because I feel like you never know when you're going to meet a person who wants to do the exact thing that you had written 5 years ago. So I always want to get a script to the place where I would feel comfortable showing it to someone else if it ever came up. Like, I don't show it to people, but I would show it to, like, I would read it, I would be happy with it, I'd show it to, like, my wife, just to make sure it makes sense and help me look for typos. And then I'm happy to put it on a shelf and never show it to anybody. Unless one day I'm at a meeting, one day I'm at a barbecue, and someone's like, yeah, I'm a producer. My brother owns a furniture store in Arizona, and I can get to free location, and I have $500,000. And if I can find a movie set in a furniture store, I can shoot there. And that's when I'm able to say, funny, I have a thriller that I wrote set in a furniture store 5 years ago. No one's ever seen it. Like, no one's ever read it. I just wrote it because I wanted to write it. It was like a story I wanted to tell. But I was very aware that there's no market for $500,000 furniture store movies. But then, who knows? Happy Time Murders. You know, D. Robertson and I came up with these characters, came up with a story. I wrote the script. We tried to get it made for fun. We just wanted to do it for fun. And it didn't happen. Put it on the shelf. Years later, we weren't doing anything with it. It was just sitting on the shelf, the virtual shelf of my computer, my agent calls me. He says, hey, the Jim Henson Company called me because they're starting a new division called Henson Alternative, and they're looking to do adult-oriented puppet stuff. And they called and they basically like, we want to develop an R-rated puppet movie. Do you have any writers who you think would be good fit to do that? And my agent said, well, actually, I have a client who already wrote an R-rated puppet movie. It's called The Happy Time Murders. He wrote it like 5 years ago. And they were like, what? So he sent it over and they read it and they're like, oh yeah, great, let's do this. This is exactly what we wanted. But we had already done it just for fun. So that's always been my method. It's just like, I write stuff for fun that I like, and then I put it on the shelf, and maybe one day it'll come up in conversation and someone will want to make it. Who knows?
What makes it an R rating? What are these puppets doing that's so adult oriented?
It's sex, drugs, violence, rock and roll. The puppets are doing everything that people do in their everyday life, but we're finally seeing what the puppets do behind closed doors, what the puppets do on the streets, how the puppets actually talk to each other. I've written a bunch of family stuff, and I've written a bunch of PG movies, but I've also the movies I've directed have always been R, and they're always filled with cursing and adult themes. And people have asked me like, well, why do you have these characters like cursing all the time? And I'm like, because that's how people talk. Like my friends, when we're hanging out, like that's how we talk, And when you want to make a movie about a certain kind of person, like they curse a lot, like they drop F-bombs, or this is how they talk to each other. And when we set out to make a movie about the actual, like, what if there was actually a world where puppets and humans coexisted with each other, and the puppets were like this underclass of society that were, sugar addicts and like living on the streets, and like were this underclass. Like it would be pretty rough. Like, and they would talk to each other in pretty rough ways, and it would be a really interesting world to explore. And the thing about the funny thing about R-rated comedies is that there's a lot of movies you see, there's this very fine line between PG-13 and R, right? And so it's very easy to take a script and be like, why don't we just make this PG-13? All you got to do is cut some F-bombs out of it. But if you are going to commit to making an R-rated movie, a lot of times studios or production companies will say, if this is going to be R, let's make it R. Like, let's go for it, Like, because why not? Like, we've already committed to appealing to a certain kind of audience that wants to see an R-rated comedy, and we've alienated anyone under the age of 16 who can't go see it unless they're with a parent or guardian. So we might as well go for it, Like, there's no point in making an R-rated comedy that's going to have like one or two F-bombs and that's why it's R. Like, why? Like, let's just go for it and get nuts, and like, let's show the sordid private lives of puppets and all the shenanigans they get up to.
You had said if you're going to go R,
Yeah.
like kind of like go big or go home,
Right.
so to speak. And I was reading a Judy Blume novel that was specifically for adults, and I thought, oh, how bad could this be? And then basically first page in, I'm like, oh wow, yeah,
Yeah.
there's a reason. Yep.
Yeah.
So were there scenes that you had to like amp up in terms of it wasn't R enough?
Well, yeah, I mean, when we set it up, when I set up with the Henson Company, we had conversations because we wrote it as a hard R. Like, we came up with this idea, and I wrote the script to be hard R. When we set it up at the Jim Henson Company, we had conversations of, should we make this PG-13? Like, are we alienating a segment of the audience? Like, if it is R, but this is the mid-2000s, and like, South Park was incredibly popular, and Ted came out, and people loved Avenue Q, and there was definitely a market for R-rated entertainment that like twisted the tropes of children's entertainment. And when we set the movie up at STX was like, no, this is going to be R, and we almost want it to be super R, so that we wanted to make it very clear this is not a kids movie. Like, we want to embrace the dark, twisted part of it, And we want to totally explore that. We totally want to go down that road. And we want to make sure parents know that this is an R-rated movie that is not for your children. So even part of the ad campaign, I mean, is like them making it very clear to people, this is not a children's movie. Do not take your children to this movie. And so we never, like, no one ever said like, hey, R it up. Like, we really want you to make this, we want you to add stuff that's just for, you know, gross out factors or anything like that. But we were always welcome. It was always understood, like, no, we want this to be R. We're totally fine with it. And if anything, like, we want everyone to know that, because we don't want anyone accidentally bringing like a 7-year-old into this movie. So, because, you know, I'd seen a lot of R-rated comedies where it was clear, like, there was a studio note at some point that said, we need some sequence that's just there to be gross, you know, like, this is a gross out comedy. There's something that has like nothing to do with the plot or the story or the characters that we just need to throw in there. But we never really encountered that. I mean, people were always like, the nature of the story and the characters itself is R, and everything that happens to everybody is R. So it kind of worked cohesively rather than we need something here that's going to be crude just for crude's sake.
Do you think you're a better writer when you're going through happy times in your life, or when maybe things are a little bit uncertain and you think that's when you're more creative?
I think you're always kind of the same writer no matter what mood you're in, but what you're writing about changes. And I think, you know, everything we write says something about something, right? And whether it says something about the human condition or the world, and if I'm in happier times, if I'm in better moods, I'm probably writing something that is more specifically positive or celebrating the good things about humanity. But if I'm in a darker place, if I'm sad or if I'm upset, I'm probably writing something that is more a biting satire of the bad parts of the human condition. But probably the writing level is the same. Like, I don't think me being in a bad place or something makes me a better writer. And I definitely don't think, you know, artists don't need to suffer in order to make good art, you know, but I think what you are making art about definitely probably changes, and depending on what you're experiencing at any given moment.
We had this comment come in from Millie Purpose. How do you know people will laugh or share and have sort of the same humor that you will have?
I mean, you never know when people are going to find funny what you find funny, and you never know when they're going to laugh what you laugh at, but sometimes I don't care. Like, to me, I'm just trying to do something that I think is funny, and I hope, with fingers crossed, that other people are going to find it funny too. And, you know, there are certain jobs I'll take where I try to, like, if I'm going to write a kid's movie, I try to get into the head of a kid. Like, what would I have thought was funny if I was a kid, if I was 7 years old? Like, would I find this funny? But when I'm just unbridled and I'm writing a comedy, when I just want to write something really funny, I just think about what would I, Todd Berger, find really funny? And if other people find it funny, great. If they don't, well, that's on them. Maybe they need a better sense of humor, you know?
Yeah.
But you never know. And, like, you can't, I think as a comedy writer, you can't try to get in the heads of other people and think what they're going to think is funny. You have to just write what you think is funny, and then you'll find out later. I mean, I wrote stuff in Happy Time Murders that I thought was really funny, and then we had a test screening of the movie. People did not think that joke was funny. I thought it was really funny. Or the opposite. There would be something that I didn't think was very funny, and people thought was hilarious. And you're like, oh, you never know. Like, you never know what people are going to find funny. You just hope you hit more than you miss, and hope that people are on the same page with you. But really, we should all be writing movies that we want to watch. We should be the target audience of our own movie. And even if you're writing a kids movie, you should want to write a movie that you would want to take your kids to. Or if you were a kid, you would have wanted to watch. And yeah, so, like, you should be your own audience.
That's a bumper sticker.
Yeah.
I like that.
We should
be
all be
your
our own audience. That's probably like a Netflix slogan we don't know about. Be your own audience.